Welcome to the Jamal Thomas Morning Show. My name is Jamal Thomas. This is indeed my show. I'm glad you guys can join me this morning. It is a Thanksgiving week, 11:25. Thanksgiving is in 2 days. Just as a reminder, I will not be here on Thanksgiving, despite the fact that they don't celebrate it here. I was trying to explain to a nurse, actually, very attractive nurse, extremely attractive nurse. I was like, hey, Thursday's Thanksgiving, right? Back in the States. She was like, oh, okay, okay. I said, we murdered the overwhelming majority of the Native Americans and we celebrated with a meal. And she's looking at me with this just complete unrecognition. It's like, okay. But nevertheless, I enjoy the holiday. It's one of my favorites. So I'm going to take that day. I will see about Friday, but definitely Thursday is mine. But I'm glad you all can join me. I'm glad, hopefully, you guys had a fantastic night, or at the very least, a fantastic day, depending upon where you are. We have a damn good show for you today. Dimitri did run into an emergency yesterday, and so he will be here today. He will be here at 8:30. We have a full show. So Dr. Jeff Rich, he's going to be on talking about Donald Trump's plan, or let's see, Europe's, let's say, dismantling of that plan, or doing everything in their power to dismantle that plan. Carl Jha is going to be here talking about the phone call between Xi Jinping and Donald Trump that took place. Interesting phone call, by the way, because the row between Japan and China is still going on. The Prime Minister of Japan, who effectively, let's say, made some pretty provocative statements about defending Taiwan. Again, that's part of China. That has not gone away, and that just not gone away. This seemed to have gotten worse. Xi Jinping and Donald Trump had a phone call, and it seemed the phone call, the tenor of it, at least going by Xi Jinping's readout, was specifically Taiwan, and specifically also Japan, and the things that Japan said in relation to Taiwan. And it was an interesting thing of like this kind of reaffirmation of the the post-World War II order, that type of thing, and how Taiwan is part of China, etc. Now, I don't know if Donald Trump entirely got the hint or the point, and the Chinese have a way of understating stuff that can be somewhat muted. By the same token, Donald Trump had a phone call with the Japanese prime minister immediately after, like a day later. So something got through. And it's very possible that the readout that we were given is a muted version of whatever the conversation Xi Jinping had with Donald Trump. Interesting, to say the least. So Carl Jha is going to have a conversation about that. He's going to be on for about 30. Then Dimitri is going to come on, and then Shobhan Saxena. Donald Trump has been increasing, let's say, the aggression towards Venezuela. He went so far as to declare, Cartel del Sol, a group that doesn't exist, purely a CIA fabrication. Everybody knows this is CIA fabrication, meaning everybody knows this is fake. Nobody is unclear that this is fake. Maybe some rando sitting somewhere may think, hey, Donald Trump is defending America against fentanyl. Okay, some rando maybe think that. But the overwhelming majority of the American public remembers weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, and hopefully that is soaked into the consciousness of the American public that they are lying. That they are lying. Now, Shobhan wrote an article in relation to effectively what is happening there and his belief in regards to what Donald Trump's endgame may ultimately be. Either way, the military arsenal that is building up is getting fearsome. It's already fearsome. But obviously, the more military personnel, the more assets that you put into a particular region, it gives you this impression that at some point, the potential energy will become kinetic. There will be a catastrophe based on a lie. And, the reality of it is there's so many different moving parts to this. I mean, there's the Russia, China, Iran angle, meaning their relationship with Maduro. There's oil, mineral wealth angle. There's that. Meaning all of these things are intermingled into this regime change war. There's also, if I had to guess, and maybe I'm wrong on this, but there's also this element of, you tried in Ukraine is getting the stuffing kicked out of it. By your own estimates, Ukraine is getting the stuffing kicked out of it. You tried to take down Iran. That failed miserably. You tried to go after China with the tariff war. That failed miserably. In fact, you got folded. You just got folded. Backbreaker like Lex Luger. You guys may not know who that is, especially if you're younger, or if you didn't necessarily watch pro wrestling. Lex Luger used to be this just roided, human, just muscles coming out of everywhere. And he would have this move called the backbreaker, where he'd take a guy up and just hold him up in a rack. And just, or better yet, like Bane breaking Batman's back. Everybody remember, well, I don't know if everybody remembers it. I don't know how many people read comic books, but there's this iconic scene in Batman comics where Batman fights Bane, and Bane beats the stuffing out of Batman. And to finish it all off, he takes him up and just breaks Batman's back on his knee. And there's this iconic image of this in the comic books. I think, if I'm not mistaken, it takes up the whole page of Batman just getting his back broken. They do it in the movies, but the movies doesn't do it as much justice as a comic book, because the comic book makes it clear how bad Batman got his ass kicked. I'm saying that for all intents and purposes, many of the, let's say, escapades that Donald Trump went with, or at the very least his predecessor went with, failed. They failed. And so it's like, okay, even Yemen is a bit too tough. Let's go after Venezuela. Let's show how big our penis is. Our penis is not deflated by failing on these other things. We have a huge penis. We can show it. But nevertheless, it will be a catastrophe, an utter and complete catastrophe, not to mention the number of people you're going to just murder. Unconstitutional. But again, that never necessarily has stopped us in the past either, right? So there's that. One last point on the Russia front. The United States and Europe has a bad habit of talking to itself and talking to itself in the open. And the reason why I call this a bad habit is because, for all intents and purposes, instead of having patient, thorough negotiations with the Russians, Trump has put out a plan that was already a dead letter. Apparently, this plan was worked out by Jared Kushner Witkoff in conversation with Kirill Dmitriev. Kirill Dmitriev is kind of an envoy, but he's not within the inner circle. But take it for what it's worth. He's an envoy. They work out a 28-point plan. The 28-point plan was already a dead letter, but it shows something very significant. Whereas before, you had pretty much nothing. The reality on the ground got across. Okay, I guess the Russians are doing better than we thought. Ukraine looks like it's going to collapse. We need to do something. Let's see if we can throw this out, something that will give this impression that Ukraine has failed miserably. But then we, the United States, as a third party, not really involved. And maybe we can make a buck off of it also in the process. Now, this is a dead letter. It's a dead letter. But at the very least, it's a dead letter that on some level can be resurrected as a basis for negotiations, even if nothing ultimately comes out of it, because Russia is going to accomplish a special military operation on the ground, and any negotiation that takes place is going to be painstaking with every T and I dotted. I hope you get my point. So there's this thing with the Europeans who don't have an interest in the war ending, who for all intents and purposes would prefer to blame everything on the United States and say, hey, we were with you, ride or die, man, for as long as it takes. It's that Donald Trump who didn't have an interest in seeing this through. Okay, there may be that. There may be, hey, the plan is to extend the Russians. And so if they have to take over the entirety of the Ukraine, that is an overextension of Russia in the way that they think about it. There may be that. Who knows what is in their minds, per se. But what Trump is doing is effectively a deal that at the very least was the basis of negotiation. In any conversation with the Europeans, that's a non-starter. Non-starter. Now, elements of the Trump administration says Europe doesn't matter. And so what you may have is, well, let them play in their sandbox and write up whatever they want. That's one thought, right? That you're allowing Europe to effectively come up with something that doesn't really matter. It could be that. I mean, for all intents and purposes, Europeans apparently weren't aware of this plan. Russia and its allies were aware of this plan because Russia immediately went to them and kind of discussed it. there are multiple plans that are effectively floating around, but the one that the Russians discuss with Russia, or Moscow, I should say, was the one that was being discussed at the Alaska summit. These other plans, who knows? And as Russia said, look, we don't know what this other plan is. We haven't discussed this plan. We don't know what that is. There is something to be said for getting your ducks in a row before going to the Russians, for saying, all right, we have agreement on this. Let's have a basis of negotiations upon the thing that we agree upon. But let's be very clear. As it stands, it is a dead letter. And any conversation with the Europeans makes it that much more of a dead letter, meaning it's a dead letter to a dead man. I think I forget the name that I named this thing. What is it? Or I put on the front, but it's something like a dead man's dead letter or something to that effect. But as Putin pointed out, a basis of negotiation. I have my guest here. It is late there, so I want to go to him. The man, the legend, the one and only, Dr. Jeff Rich. How you doing, Jeff? You doing okay today?
Very well, Jamal. How are you?
I am doing okay, man. God, man, every time I see you, I feel so bad. The audience may not know how committed Jeff is. It is 11:15 where Jeff is. 11:15. You guys went back an hour. We went back an hour. And so that adds like 2 hours to already a 2-hour time lag. It's a mess. But Jeff,
I'm reliving my youth as
is that what it is? Burning the candle at both ends. Dr. Jeff Rich, he's a historian, author, retired government official from Melbourne, Australia, with a PhD in history and over 3 decades of experience in government. He created the Burning Archive YouTube channel, a damn good channel, by the way. Substack, where he shares commentaries, book reviews, and interviews on world history, culture, and politics. He has written 4 books, including 13 Ways of Looking at a Bureaucrat. Jeff, I thought about doing book reviews myself, but I think I get overexcited when I talk about book reviews or movie reviews and stuff like that. And the audience just is like, it's like, God, man, why is he so hyped up? Thank you for joining me, man. You doing okay tonight?
Oh, very well. Yeah, it's been a little while, so it's really great to come back to you. I had a few little,
technical glitches,
personal problems, including my computer dying, but
yeah, that happens.
yeah.
Where was I? I think I was in Malaysia and my computer died. And I ended up going to a tech shop in order to get it fixed. And they like beefed it up on top of fixing it. I think I paid $50. It's like, thank you. Because it's a catastrophic thing, especially like right now, I'm in Kathmandu. If this computer dies, I have no idea where to go to get this thing fixed. I have to work it out. But Jeff, Donald Trump has released the 28-point Ukraine peace plan.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, this apparently shocked the Europeans, shocked some people in the US government. Putin came out in his speech, and I played the entirety of the speech, where he pointed out, look, we haven't necessarily talked about this specific plan, but there was a plan even before the Alaska summit that was on the table. And this was something that was discussed, and we were waiting for the United States to get back to us. And of course, the United States ended up with tomahawks and tariffs and all this other stuff because basically Ukraine wasn't ready to sign on to that agreement. So Donald Trump has come up with this new plan. Apparently, Jared Kushner, Witkoff, and Kirill Dmitriev.
Yep.
The Europeans immediately freak out. The Europeans are doing everything in their power to get their plan, which is like NATO membership, EU membership, basically doing everything to kill the plan. What are your thoughts on this? I mean, this is obviously a dead letter for the Russians. There are several points that are a dead letter, but Putin did point out that this stuff can be the basis of negotiation. But give me your thoughts.
Well, heretical though it might be to say this on some, alt media channels, I think Europe has a good case that it wasn't a great plan. They were sort of right in many ways. But I think it's also, at least in some respects, it's also useful to go back to the process with this, which has actually been outlined in various ways by Lavrov and others, where, there was some kind of proposal put by Witkoff before the Anchorage summit. Let's say it was like a heads of agreement, like there's 6 to 10 topics that we think need to be part of the plan. Let's not talk about the detail now, but let's establish a process to do it. The Anchorage summit happened, and then the Russians have said there was this thing called a no paper that was distributed. A no paper is sort of a diplomatic term for a sort of a concept paper or an issues paper, or writing down possible negotiation points as a peace agreement without saying this is what we're proposing, just to get some actual specifics to talk about.
It's like parameters.
So, yeah, exactly, some parameters. So rather than just say, oh, we need a collective security architecture in Europe, whatever that means, someone write it into a sentence and turn it into a specific action, and then we can say, well, yeah, we need to strengthen this or that kind of thing. And I would say that the 28-point plan is the sort of American response to perhaps an initial Russian draft of the no paper. And the Russian draft of the no paper probably had points about, some sort of collective security agreement based on the 2021 treaty proposal from Russia, dealing with, demilitarization, dealing with denazification, etc., etc., etc. And you can see that these 28 points are various American adaptations of them. Now, a lot of them are just, like I did a detailed sort of clause-by-clause analysis over at my Substack, but I won't go through all of that now. But a lot of them were just, a blatant self-interest on the United States' part. Like, we'll get Europe to steal Russia's frozen assets, and then we'll take 50% of the profits from it. So like,
Right.
Oh, great idea, great idea.
Right.
And things like that, and they also include a whole set of commitments that the United States has no capacity to make. Like, it's saying, well, Ukraine can join the European Union. Why not? We don't have to pay for it.
Yeah.
Things like this. So it was always going to be pretty silly, and even some of the sort of collective security sort of proposals were also pretty nebulous. Like it was proposing that the United States mediate between NATO, controlled, operated, funded, created by the United States, and Russia to resolve the ambiguities of the last 30 years. So it was a very soft proposal. Now, I would have said the Russians nonetheless are saying, well, it's a basis of an agreement. If we put another 6 to 12 months work into it, is perhaps the unstated thing. But again, it was promoted by the Americans as this sort of sign or die sort of agreement. The new J.D. Vance's Secretary of the Army sort of guy, his old university pal, went to Kiev and said, you've got to sign or else. And Zelensky said, you know what? I don't have to sign.
Yeah.
I talked to my friends over here in Germany and Britain and France, and what's more, it's a really dumb agreement because you've said all these outrageous things that you have no capacity to deliver on, and actually are not sensible approaches to the peace. So it was, as you said, it was a very poorly constructed agreement, which yet again was another example of this sort of rush to get a headline by a deadline. It's like the Budapest summit. The Russian officials were saying the phone call between Putin and Trump. Trump was looking desperate. They used double words, but the coded diplomatic language was he was desperate to get an announcement quickly, so that he could say he'd solved another peace deal.
Yeah.
And in a way, this has been another case of this. It's sort of let's solve the Ukraine war by Thanksgiving.
Right.
Sort of
Right. Right.
seriously.
Right. Right.
Can we just work something up here? So, I mean, it's hard to know with all the different reports about it, how much it reflected different positions within the American government and all that sort of stuff. A lot
Mm.
of that kind of stuff is probably sort of backfilling, background briefing to journalists to either put someone in give make it someone look bad or make someone look good. I suspect it is just a general collective process across the American diplomatic and security services network.
Yeah.
But it's been another case of incompetent American diplomacy, and it came out with a whole lot of fanfare last week or whatever, late last week, and within a few days, with the quite extensive discussions in Geneva featuring Marco Rubio,
Mm-hmm.
and the European Union and Britain and Germany and France, and a very big delegation from Ukraine. The 28-point plan has been wound down to a 19-point plan. Now, I don't think that 19-point plan has been revealed, but the reports are that what's dropped is the the cute clause that America would sort of take a 50% profit share off the stolen Russian assets.
Yeah. Oh, don't forget, Europe is supposed to put 100 billion in
Oh
also.
yeah, that's right, and presumably that's gone as well. The clause about preventing Ukraine acceding to NATO is gone. The territories clause is gone. Presumably the guarantee that Ukraine can join the European Union is gone. The restrictions on the size of the army is gone. The decisions on the sanctions are gone. Again, it's not just America that applies sanctions to Russia, it's also Europe. So, again, America's making decisions for other parties that it doesn't have a capacity to make decisions for. And basically, there's a sense that it has been significantly altered. Now, the Ukrainian press, interestingly, are saying that Zelensky had a choice of submitting to this 28-point plan and then causing a lot of internal unrest. Like it would be. He talked about agreeing to the 28 points or sacrificing or maintaining the dignity of Russia, which is a significant, term
Dignity
within
of
Russia,
Ukraine.
within
Right.
Ukraine. But it's also, I guess it's, we want to make self-respecting decisions about our own country and not just, have America loot our country again after killing, 1 million of our people.
Yeah.
Then the other option was to oppose Trump and risk America withdrawing from the,
Yes.
withdrawing its military and intelligence type operations. And the third option was the sort of crafty option, which was to say, let's amend the plan with the support of Europe and Britain sufficiently to mean that we're not being totally obstructionist, and we might be giving Trump some sort of sense of making progress while also making it sort of forcing the choice on Russia to say, well,
Right.
this is unacceptable.
Right.
So it's yet to be seen, I guess. So that appears to be how they've played it. And certainly the Russian press that I've been reading today think that that the heavy involvement in Europe from Europe will probably make this redrafted proposal unacceptable as it is.
Right.
But I guess the question is it is it if I were the Russians, I would not outright reject the adapted proposal. I would just say, let's keep the process rolling, guys. And we just need to do this a little bit more. And while we talk, I guess we'll continue the operations that we're undertaking. So
Yes,
yeah,
that is exactly what's going to happen. By the way,
yeah.
I mean that they've always said, "Look, we're open for negotiations. They just need to be effectively. You need to accept our terms."
Yeah.
But we're open to talk. And as Putin said, the American side asks us for flexibility. We were willing to show flexibility in this. But again, the first plan was a dead letter. And if Donald Trump is dumb enough to let the Europeans effectively put poison pills that are never going to be accepted, meaning the moment that you say Ukraine can extend to NATO, the plan is dead. Meaning first point in the plan is dead right off the bat. It doesn't matter. The entire point of the war, right, was to keep Europeans or to keep Ukraine out of NATO. And so if that is not going to be attended to, and that is the major point of the conflict, then it is already a dead letter. You would think that the Trump administration would have some sighted person with the sense enough to realize, hey, this is a plan that was already unacceptable, has become that much more unacceptable from the Russians' point of view.
Yeah. I mean, they really, in my opinion, really need a different process and strategy. And I would say both the Russians and the United States do as well. I mean, the United States is effectively, if I could call it a little bit cutely with a reference to World War II, it's leading the Axis powers of Europe, Britain and Ukraine in the war against Russia. But it keeps approaching these negotiations as either a mediator or somehow not involved, or assuming it can do things unilaterally, rather than recognizing the fact that each of those parties are playing a significant role. It may be different, all the rest of it, but they each have set of objectives, a lot of stakes. Ukraine's case, very obviously. So Europe.
Oh, Jeff, I so disagree with you on this. Oh, I so disagree with you on this. Yeah, because for one, it was Ukraine is not a sovereign country. Full stop. They're not. They haven't been sovereign ever since Yanukovych was removed from power. And you can even make an argument even before that, right? Europe is not a sovereign entity. And the United States, at any point in this process, can walk. They could say, all right, we're out. Figure it out. You're all horrible people. We're out. We're done. And let Europe figure this out. And they would fail miserably. The reason that they're struggling so much right now is because they're trying to get their hands on the Russian money. It's because they can't afford it, which means Europe, don't have the weapons to prosecute the war. They would have to buy them from the United States. Don't have the money to buy those weapons for the United States. Don't have the $50 billion in order to keep Ukraine even functional in and of itself. Why do they get a say? Like, meaning if the United States is the principal actor in this, which it is, and they are the mover and shaker in this, which it is, and you have Europe who's like, hey, let's just keep this war going. If indeed Donald Trump wants to end this, Trump can always walk. He can always walk. He could have walked on day one. Figure it out. If you guys feel this important about it, feel this strongly about it, work it out and see what happens. See what happens.
But I guess when one starts defining what walking is, then I think you start to see how there's perhaps there's a more entanglement of the United States in this situation than that would imply. Because what does walking out of Ukraine really mean? I mean, Ukraine has been a central plank of, the American grand strategy to sort of move eastward through Europe and weaken Russia since at least 1991, really. Arguably before then as well, but certainly explicitly since, there's documented archival records of President Bush Senior and Dick Cheney and co. explicitly talking about this, that
Right.
they want to use aggressive strategy, using separatism and nationalism, and breaking up the Soviet Union and also Russia, and making the successor state Russia, so economically crippled it could never be a defense power, and Ukraine
And they
was central
tried.
to that.
And they tried.
And they
Failed.
they succeeded for 10 years, really.
Was it for 10 years?
Well, and then things started turning around in 2000,
Right.
and very explicitly so, more from 2008. And then the West turned against and said, "Oh my God, they're not playing their role. Putin's not playing his role. He's sort of asserting Russian power."
Yes.
If America walks from Ukraine, do they walk from their bases on the border of Ukraine, in Poland, in Romania, in Hungary? Do they
That's a good
stop
question.
flying? Do they stop flying flights over the Black Sea? Do they take out all of the intelligence operations? Do they take out all of the covert things which people might find out about in 30 or 50 years time?
Well, those are memorandums, Jeff, as you pointed out. Those are things that to be found after the fact. But I'm saying, pull out CIA, stop giving money, stop giving intelligence, and let Europe figure it out. And Europe will come to the conclusion very quickly that they can't figure it out.
Yeah. But you see, the big issue for Europe is like if we go back to 2014, there's been this sort of under the scene, or behind the curtain sort of conflict between the United States and Europe over Ukraine since at least 2014. Part of the crisis in 2013, 2014 was, in the context of the Eurozone problems, Ukraine was kind of connected to that because there were sort of financial debt crises in Ukraine.
Right.
Ukraine very much wanted to be part of Europe because, it was kind of a fantasy, not just about liberalism, not just about sort of cultural identity, but also about, being a hell of a lot richer than Ukraine was, because since 1991, Ukraine has really, not performed very well economically.
Right.
But the Europeans played hardball and, offered a very tough agreement, which alienated the Ukrainian sort of elites and pushed them more into the American camp. And the Europeans were pursuing, their sort of economic national security interests as well. They, Ukraine is sort of part of the broader sort of German East European sort of economic zone. This is one of the points Emmanuel Todd makes in his book, The Defeat of the West, that part of the story of the Ukraine war was sort of German hubris in the period 2008 to 2014, that it could sort of, create a sort of economic empire, if you like, in Eastern Europe. And, the German industrial sort of network is spread across Eastern Europe. It's not all just in Germany. So there are, and fundamentally, it's like real estate, position. Ukraine is in Europe and the United States is not in Europe. And one way or the other, Ukraine's future is going to be tied up a lot more with Europe because of borders, because of people movements, because of, sort of natural economic networks, all these kind of things, than it will be with the United States. And America's sort of pursuing this kind of unsustainable policy, really, of kind of, well, I mean, in effect, it's created this sort of intelligence military colony in the centre of Eastern Europe since
Uh-huh.
2014. That's basically what it's done, isn't it? As you say, if you treat Ukraine as not a sovereign state, it's probably not unreasonable to describe it as a kind of a military colony. But they've done it by empowering this
I
incredibly
know.
corrupt regime
Yes.
with a very toxic ideology that is,
Understatement.
dreadful. So, I mean, I do think Europe has genuine and sincere interests and, significant role. It's contributed financially, all this kind of thing. So yeah, this is where I guess we disagree. The
Yeah,
people I
I agree
reckon
now.
really ought to be, sort of run out of Ukraine are the Brits, of course, because they play quite a significant role. And I think
Mhm.
if Britain really wanted to leave Europe in 2016,
Then they should have left
voted for
Europe in
Brexit and all that sort of stuff,
2016.
they should
Right.
get the hell out of Europe. But
Um, Look, if I don't attach sincerity to Europe, if I'm being honest with you,
yeah,
and I didn't tell Europe to allow itself to be, let's say, marginalized by the United States. I didn't tell them to
yeah,
do that any more than I
no,
told
no,
Ukraine to allow,
yeah,
because that deal, Europe and the United States effectively wanted Ukraine to sign on to a deal that would have been devastating for Ukraine. Russia
yeah,
had their own deal. And the CIA, all of this
mm,
media and everything else had split the country
mm,
almost down the middle in regards
mm,
to, hey, you're going to be part of Europe. Let's be part of
mm,
NATO. Let's do all of
mm,
this stuff. And you have ethnic Russian Ukrainians who obviously didn't necessarily want to be part of any of that stuff.
mm,
Yanukovych knew full well that that deal was not in his best interest, that the Russian
mm,
deal was a better deal for him. And
mm,
what happened? Within several weeks, Victoria Nuland, the phone call with Jeffrey Pyatt saying, F the EU, we're going to effectively midwife this thing. And
mm,
you get the overthrow of the government with everybody who they were talking about putting in power.
mm, mm,
Europe didn't seem to be entirely against this.
mm.
I mean, if that makes sense. And
Oh,
even now,
and I'm not defending the nature of I believe Europe's pursued um, as tragically bad sets of strategies as Britain and the United States in
yes.
relationship to Ukraine. And I think in particular the Easternization of Europe that Jacques Beau talks about, and that to some degree has been instigated by the United States and by Britain to counterbalance the role of France and Germany.
Germany.
I mean,
Yeah.
I did a video about Britain's role in the sort of Ukraine situation a week or so ago, and I came across this paper by the Council on Geostrategy in Britain,
Mhm.
which explicitly said, Britain should be Eastern Europe's security guarantee. Britain created a real diplomatic dilemma for itself after Brexit because it left Europe, so its only its only kind of source of diplomatic, economic, political clout within the country became within the continent. The second largest economic entity in the world. It's a very big economic entity, the European
Wait, Britain?
Union.
Oh, European Union. Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah. Was through the sort of military intelligence kind of, old sort of diplomatic influences with Eastern Europe. So, I think one of the reasons the European Union now has dreadful foreign ministers like Kaja Kallas rather than the capable foreign ministers they had in the early 2000s
Yeah.
is the role of Britain and the United States in empowering the sort of kind of British American educated Russophobic Eastern European, and Baltic state elites
Yeah.
And it's been a really, really negative influence, I think on European
Oh, agreed. Agreed.
government and diplomacy. So yeah, I mean, I'm not saying that. I guess the current set of actors within Europe have been, you know, good actors, but that there are real, genuine interests between for Europe in Ukraine, and they need to be part of any peace process. So if there is going to be an actual peace process that actually works, this is where I say the European Union have a fair point that they need to be part of it, as does Ukraine. And talking about vassals and all that sort of stuff is not really to the point, because, I mean, it is part of the European Union's problem that, you know, their foreign policy and their defence policy is effectively controlled, to use a phrase from J.D. Vance, by the enemy within,
Right.
and that's the United States via NATO. I mean, they've effectively, they're sort of like a divided state because they don't really have effective control of something that, you know, an effective, competent state would generally assume it would have control of, which is
Right.
its defence and foreign policy. Its defence and foreign policy is constantly sort of undermined and sabotaged by the American influence through NATO.
I get that, Jeff. But I guess my point is that I want to end the war. That's what I want.
Yeah, yeah.
And if Europe were sincere, honest actors, they would recognize Ukraine is getting the stuffing kicked out of it. And they share a huge amount of responsibility, along with the United States, for a million dead Ukrainians. When they're given the opportunity to negotiate, what do? Hey, we should allow them to be in NATO. Let's steal Russian funds in order to rebuild Ukraine. Let's do all of these things that will never pass the muster, which will prolong and allow the war to continue. And by the way, the Russians, as Putin said, we are perfectly fine with continuing the way things are, because there will be another Kupiansk and another and another. He knows what's taking place on the battlefield. He knows the context on the ground. And so, you know, when you're talking to people like Mark's point of view is Russia needs to occupy the entirety of Ukraine. Meaning a position that started off as let's have a negotiated settlement. It became clear there is no one to negotiate with. So this idea of sincere, honest, decent people in Europe that are willing to stop the killing and recognize the reality on the ground, they don't exist. So
look, I agree. I agree.
Yeah,
that,
so
that,
when
yeah,
which,
I mean, that's a real problem, and
which informs my point
I,
of view
yeah,
of
yeah,
saying
yeah,
if
yeah.
indeed the U.S. is serious about a deal, I'm with Victoria Nuland, F the EU, and get the deal done. And if they
Yeah.
protest, walk.
See,
Let them figure it out.
I wonder. I mean, I totally understand Mark's viewpoint. I guess
It's not what he
my,
wants, by the way.
oh yeah, I know,
He's pushed to the
and
position. It's like he just
yeah,
edged himself further and further.
and I think I saw an interview with Fyodor Lukyanov, who's the guy who interviews Putin at the Valdo conference every year, or sort of hosts him. And you know, he was very. He really, Glenn Deason asked him about, you know, so what's the kind of outcome? And he really pushed back against any idea that Russia would sort of control all of Ukraine.
Yeah.
You know, certainly, you know, I mean, they focused on Western Ukraine as the sort of the extreme limit of that, but he really pushed back against it. So, but it's a real dilemma because, I mean, I don't really agree with the perspective that Russia can resolve this on the battlefield, because there's sort of no limit to that. In the end, at some point, the battlefield conditions have to force a switch where you come to an agreement, a political agreement at the peace table. And unless you have a decent process to do that, you can't do it now. Now, I don't think anyone has properly constructed a decent process and decent might not be the right word, but an effective
Mhm.
process, let's say,
Yeah.
that can enable the peace process at the moment. I don't think America is capable of it. I mean, it's sort of demonstrated consistently over the last 9 months that it keeps doing these reckless, impatient, incompetent things, and then expect people to thank them for it or to sort of praise them for, or,
Yeah.
at least they're trying. Oh my God, you're the most powerful
Failed at
country in the world. Can't you do something better than that?
They're amateurs. That's not the
Yeah,
way they think.
their incompetence.
Yeah.
It's just astonishing. And it's very disconcerting for people around the world. But it's also nothing particularly new. Like
Mhm.
this sort of arrogant incompetence of American diplomacy as being something that people have complained about for decades. And I mean, I interviewed the former Australian Foreign Minister, who's largely seen as one of the best Australian foreign ministers, Gareth Evans. He was
Yeah.
foreign minister in the 1990s, I think. Who wrote a cabinet diary in the late 80s and early 1990s, and he was complaining about these, arrogant, sort of blind, not all that capable sort of American imperial officials then. And, and this was in his sort of private diary rather than, just,
Oh, an official
sounding off in
document.
the
Yeah.
media. Yeah. It's a long established institutional pattern, but it's got, I think, a lot worse with the media
It does.
cycle and the sort of, the self-reinforcing bubble and all that kind of thing.
You must understand
So,
from our point of
yeah,
view, we're a hegemon. Like in the
yeah,
way that, and I know that's eroding,
yeah,
but it's kind of like me playing chess. When I was in my prime, and let's say
mm,
when the Soviet Union was afoot. Okay, well, you had to have good diplomats. You had to be able to sit down at a table and
mm,
discuss missile treaties and this stuff. Like it's like
mm,
building a muscle.
mm,
Soviet Union collapses. We won.
mm,
We won.
mm,
We're the only thing there is. And so
mm,
then it becomes, well, why do I need to negotiate with you in good terms? Like, why do
mm,
I need to go through this entire process? I'm gonna dictate what we're
mm,
gonna do. And
mm.
if you're at the receiving end of that, you're like, okay, this doesn't seem like a diplomacy. It just seems like you're dictating terms to me. And you go 20 years of that, 30 years of that. You don't have
Yeah,
diplomats in the
yeah,
traditional
yeah.
sense.
There's a lot of bad habits and
Yeah.
and institutional failings. And look, you see that just in the sort of the way in which Trump's allowed to talk, the way Vance is allowed to talk.
Yes.
It's just astonishing. And also the way in which, well, I mean, the way in which this 18-point peace plan was drafted, for goodness sake. I mean, there's one ridiculous clause where it says it is expected that that Russia won't invade NATO or something like that,
Right.
or it's expected that NATO won't invade Russia. And me as a very, very minor government official, if one of my staff had written that, I'd say, "What the hell are you doing? You don't
Yeah.
put
What does
that.
expected mean in this
What the
case?
hell
Right.
does that mean?"
What does that mean? Yeah, that's
I
funny. And then
mean,
it's like, does it notify this is a legal document? Legal by whose
yeah,
standards, right?
yeah,
No, it's
yeah.
a
I mean,
weird document.
yeah, it's a very weird document. So I really feel that uh, it's tragic, but there's some of these missteps are going to have to sort of play out
Mhm.
in order for people to realise that the sort of the diplomacy train needs to be set on some different tracks. At the moment, it's just going down. It's sort of going to go off a cliff kind of thing because it's just set up in the wrong sort of way. Because America is just attempting to do things unilaterally, but it's doing things unilaterally about other people rather than about itself. I mean, there's almost, I can't remember specifically, but in the 28-point plan, there's almost no specific commitments by the United States itself. I mean, there's plenty of,
There's
give us
one,
some
yeah.
money.
Right. Exactly. It's that one, right? It's like, we will take part of the money and we will, we will thank you for that money and we will find ways to exploit it. And it's like, whoa, you knock over a government creating the pretext for a war that lasts for 3 or 4 years, and then your response is Europe is going to put $100 billion into it, but we're going to take $100 billion and use for whatever. That is balls. The balls.
I mean, that's been Trump's policy since the day he got inaugurated. He keeps saying, we're not just going to give them weapons; they have to pay. We want our money back. I mean, it wasn't all that long ago that it was Trump sort of arguing with Macron in the White House when Macron came over in March or something like that. And Macron was saying, "Oh, it's a bit complex to steal the Russian money. We don't really want to do that. Legal issues." Donald was saying, "Just give me the money.
Take it. Just take the money."
So, I mean, America's unilateralist. European Union is way too truculent, and it needs to be part of the process, but it hasn't realised yet that it's doing nothing to build confidence that it is a genuine, a peace dialogue partner rather than, grandstanding or whatever. And the Ukrainian government is simply not, I just don't think the current Ukrainian regime has the political authority within Ukraine or it is so corrupt that it just is it's bad goods, damaged goods, and it's also the institutionalization of the militarism and the Nazism and the extreme nationalism is so great in Ukraine that I just can't see the current political setup in Ukraine really being a proper dialogue partner in a peace process at this point. So I do feel at some level there needs to be further military or political outcomes in Ukraine that lead to some reconfiguration of that before there can be any genuine genuine negotiations with Ukraine. And that is, and I also think Britain, I mean, I've argued that to really get a successful peace process, Britain's role needs to be minimised because it is heavily involved in that, corrupt Ukrainian regime. It's heavily vested in this sort of treating Eastern Europe as a security garrison of the British Empire. And it's gone all in on this sort of East European strategy for British influence. And so when the Zelensky regime goes, it's going to be catastrophic for that that strategy. It will be they, I don't think, are a good leader of the coalition of the willing. So it's all round poorly configured, but no one is really proposing a sort of a fundamental change to the structure of the process. I mean, I do really wonder whether, another major state like China or India should, with all due respect to Chinese diplomats, sometimes there's a few too many platitudes and not enough real action in a lot of what China says.
They're very muted in their statements. Yeah.
It's sort of
Um,
like, yeah, whether they should actually play a much more structured, mediated role, even through the UN, through the UN Security Council in some way,
well, they had the
in
Istanbul
order
agreements.
to
I mean,
design
I
a
didn't
sort
think.
of different process.
Well, I didn't think the Istanbul agreements was a negative
Mm,
process. And to be
no.
honest, if um if this 28-point peace plan was the
Yeah.
basis of conversation, I don't even think that's bad. Like, meaning, it's
Mm,
like, all right, this plan is ridiculous, but at the very least we can talk.
mm,
Because if you think of what they had before, it was like
mm,
nothing.
mm,
And facts on the ground has effectively moved the position of the United States to, okay, this is
mm,
catastrophic.
mm,
They may
mm,
collapse, and we need to do
mm,
something about the fact before they collapse, because collapse is going to be even more humiliating.
mm,
So, okay, let's give Russia some of the things that they may want.
mm,
And so, even though it's not, let's say, conducive to what the Russians want in regards to, well, here are our requirements, here are our core objectives. At the very least, it's something where you can sit down and say, okay, let's talk about this point.
mm,
Meaning, it's something on paper that you can, at the
mm,
very least, discuss and fill out elements of it in a way that wasn't necessarily true prior.
mm, mm,
If you had an Istanbul format between the Ukrainians and the Russians, where they
mm,
worked on it in that context,
mm,
maybe. But I agree with you. Just dropping
mm.
this in and saying, sign it, damn it, and you need to sign it by Thanksgiving.
And it's that thing of, I mean, maybe even, I mean, I feel Russia has pursued a strategy of either thinking Trump can negotiate on behalf of his allies.
Yes.
And Putin said things along those lines. So we're still, the agreement hasn't got anywhere because America hasn't been able to get Ukraine to sign on. And I
Right.
mean, this has been the consistent story since February, hasn't it? That
Mhm.
Trump beats his chest and then puts on a public humiliation of his European and Ukrainian allies, but then they sort of outwit him in the negotiations and get what they want anyhow.
Right.
So he's not, or the Americans at this point are not actually able to control their allies reliably in any way. So I do wonder whether that Russian strategy of negotiating with Trump as the kingpin is really viable, and whether they shouldn't just
Yeah.
say, well, we'll negotiate with the United States about the United States' involvement in the war, in Ukraine, and maybe also separate that from all the other issues to do with the United States, because I don't know if bundling them together is actually all that productive, really, at this
But
point. I mean, big
let's say you
deals
negotiate with
and
the U.S.
bridges,
directly.
tunnels under the Bering Strait and things like that.
That's right. But let's say you do that. I mean, the entire point of doing that, right, would be to get the U.S. out of the war. In which
Yeah,
case, the war
exactly.
stops.
Yeah.
But that's what they're
And
doing now, right? How is that different?
yeah,
Like, if you're
well,
saying I'm negotiating with the U.S.
there doesn't seem to be any really specific. I mean, Trump keeps occasionally making these random threats to withdraw intelligence support and all that sort
And
of
he never
stuff,
does. And he never
but he
does.
never really does it. And he keeps supplying the weapons. He just asks more. He just wants money for them.
Yeah.
He keeps providing the intelligence support. He keeps using the targeting information.
Taco. Trump
Yeah.
always
So
capitulates overall.
so I
Whatever that
almost
last quote
wonder
is.
if Russia should pursue. It's not my job to articulate their diplomatic strategy, obviously, but it's sort of like a strategic sequencing thing of, well, first they should
Deal
get
with the U.S. Get the
United
U.S. out
States
the war.
out of the Ukraine war, and then maybe after they've done that, after that, America's stopped firing missiles into Russia, they can negotiate some of the other things to do with the
Yeah.
US-Russian relationship. And if they do that, that's going to force a massive recalculation, because as you say, America's the principal military asset in this discussion, so that will force a change in negotiating position. First in Ukraine, it will create a bit of political crisis in Ukraine, and also with Europe and Britain as well. And then they can sort of perhaps separate those discussions. And I do also think that at some point, Europe and Russia have a common interest in reconstructing and solving the social problems that have developed over Ukraine, both during the war and over the last 10 years, as this, this sort of extreme nationalist project has taken off in Ukraine.
That's going to be the new leaders. That's going to have to be new leaders. Jeff, man, I've appreciated this conversation. I always appreciate these conversations, and I'm so glad that you're back, and I'm so glad your setup and everything else is reconstructed. The Burning Archive is a damn good channel, and I've said it every time you come on and I actually meet your channel. Is one of the few ones I actually watch. So keep up the good work, man. Dr. Jeff Rich, he's a historian, author, retired government official from Melbourne, Australia, with a PhD in history and over 3 decades of experience in government. He created the Burning Archive YouTube channel and Substack, where he shares commentaries, book reviews, and interviews on world history, culture, and politics. He's written 4 books, including 13 Ways of Looking at a Bureaucrat. Jeff, you have a fantastic rest of your night, man. Thank you for this.
You too. And congratulations on a year of the program, Jamal.
Well, thank you for that. I appreciate that. I appreciate that. You have a good one, man. Thank you. And the man himself, Carl Jha. How you doing, Carl? You doing okay this evening?
How are you? How are you, Jamal? I'm doing good.
I'm doing well, man. I'm better that you're joining me. I'm Carl Jha. He's host of Silk and Steel podcast, focused on China and surrounding regions and their history, culture, and politics. You can follow Carl on Twitter at Carl Jha. You can follow his podcast at Steel Silk In, and subscribe and support the podcast on patreon.com/Silk and Steel. Carl, you are the man to talk to today. So apparently Xi Jinping and Donald Trump have a phone call. They have a phone call. And what do you think that phone call is about? Japan.
Well, that's it.
And Taiwan.
That's interesting because on the White House readout, it says nothing about Taiwan or Japan. But in the Chinese readout, they said the two sides confirm the result of post, like the two sides, U.S. and China, should work together as the post-war victors of the World War II, as should be the upholder of the post-war order. Now that is a reference, from China's perspective, to the case of Taiwan and Japan, because obviously Japan was the defeated enemy in the World War II, and Taiwan was returned to China as a result of Japan's surrender. And this is what Chinese readout is referring to. Of course, Donald Trump's White House readout mentioned none of that. But I mean, I think they did talk about it, and Trump just didn't want to embarrass the Japanese prime minister too much, given what she did, the recent antics. And Trump also confirmed that he was going to visit Beijing next year in April. So right now it looks like there is a tentative détente in the U.S.-China relationship as a result of their meeting in Busan in South Korea, and a temporary truce on the trade war. Trump is the type of person, he respects strength, right? He despises weakness. He said this publicly many times. This is why the European leaders, as much as they try to appease him on every issue, Trump just slapped them with tariff left and right. But whereas in Xi Jinping in China, Trump saw strength, in the way that China pushed back on the tariff war. So Trump respects that. And we're going to have to see how that hold out, because, the military-industrial complex of Washington, U.S. really have logic of their own. They pretty much going to keep the tension going so they can keep on doing their weapon sales. So we're going to have to see how this Trump initiative will hold out over long term.
Yeah, agreed. The Chinese readout is very interesting compared to Trump's, because Trump is like, yeah, we talked about fentanyl and we talked about all this other random stuff and buying grain or soybeans. The Chinese readout was very specific, muted, but specific. We talked about Taiwan. We talked about the post-World War II order. We talked about how important it was that the U.S. and China were the guarantors of that post-World II order. And obviously, all of this is talking about Japan. Japan is wilding out right now, and you need to calm down your lady. Like she is hopped up on something. You need to chill her out because she's pissing us off right now. And by the way, she's not backing down from this. Like I saw this recent thing. It says, let's see, Tachaki explained that while Japan would never ever accept threats against Taiwan or Japan, we're always willing to talk. Increasingly, it seems like the CCP is not interested in dialogue, and therefore we must rearm immediately. Now, immediately after this phone call with Donald Trump, apparently Trump, the very next day, called the Prime Minister of Japan. They are not disclosing what that conversation was about. But obviously, that conversation was about, you need to chill out. You need to chill out.
I mean,
was about.
In Japan's case, this is obviously premeditated. The Prime Minister of Japan didn't wake up one day and decide, you know what, I'm going to poke the panda today. Because right after her speech, Japan just announced they're going to deploy missiles within 70 miles of Taiwan on the closest island that Japan has control over, in the Yonaguni Island. And again, this has been planned out way in advance, because you can't just do missile deployment like that. You know, there have been preparation, setting up base and everything. So this is all part of the plan. Now, the question really is, why is the Japanese minister doing this at this particular juncture? Now, I'm going to stick to my conjecture that this is because currently it looks like there's a temporary détente in the Sino-American relationship. And this is equivalent of the Europeans saying, oh, you know what? If America's not going to fight the Ukraine war, we're going to fund it. We're going to keep it going. I mean, like Germany, Merz just said they're going to deploy deploy missiles to long range missiles into Ukraine, but this is really just the way for the imperial vassals to cry for help, to cry for the U.S. to come back into their arena, because for Japan right now, Japan is facing very tough economic headwind. You know, Japanese economy is quietly imploding right now. That's going to also have a cascading effect on the U.S. economy, because there has been a decade-long what's called yen carry trade, because when Japan had pumped a lot of money, keep the interest low, so a lot of the Wall Street guys thought, hey, we're the smartest guys in the room. We're going to borrow tons of money, yen, from Japan, and we're going to invest it in high-yielding U.S. assets like stocks, right? But when the Japanese, I don't know if people are paying attention, but the Japanese interest rate is rising and rising, and that means all these people who had borrowed money, many of them are margins, to invest in the U.S. stocks. Now suddenly, like, holy crap, we have to pay back with interest, with a lot more interest. So a lot of people are going to start panicking and unwind their positions, and that's going to have a negative impact on the U.S. stock market and the bond market. But Japan, this is all because Japan is facing some serious economic issues. So why is the Japanese prime minister? You got to ask, why is she doing this at this particular juncture? And the reason why is because they're panicking. They're panicking because back in the days of Obama era, Obama openly spoke about how Asia Pacific is going to be the future. The Atlantic, that is the old stuff. We're going to shift our focus on the Pacific because this is the fastest growing region of the globe. And Obama spoke glowingly about how Japan is going to be the junior partner of the United States, the way that UK had been playing that role in the transatlantic relationship, right? And Japan was going to be US centerpiece to continue to dominate Western Pacific and East Asia. And one of Obama's baby was the Trans-Pacific Partnership. Do you remember that? The Trans-Pacific Partnership?
Asian
and then that coincided with pivot to Asia. That also happened under Obama's first term under Secretary of State Hillary Clinton. And then what happened is Trump came to the office the first term. He scattered that. He scattered the Trans-Pacific Partnership. That was dead in the water. And Trump himself personally have a personal antagonism against Japan. Because you got to remember, Trump is his peak years is 1980s. That's the time that left a very deep impression in Trump. And in 1980s, if you look at Trump's statement, he keep on railing against Japan. How Japan is taking advantage of us, how Japan is, he wants to make the Japan pay. I think he's still kind of stuck in that mode. This is why some of the quote unquote U.S. allies are worried about Trump, because he's kind of scattered. They're afraid that he will scatter the whole Obama-Biden legacy of.
Wait, Carl, I hate to interrupt. I'm sorry to interrupt. What happened in the 80s? I'm just lost. What happened in the 80s that pissed Trump off?
What happened in the 80s? That was a high day of Japan miracle. Remember, there was a time they thought Japan was going to overtake the United States as a dominant economy in the world. Japan,
really?
You remember 1990s? All this Japan fear mongering. You have like George Freeman coming out with a book called The Coming War with Japan, and you have Michael Crichton who wrote that book, Rising Sun, which made into a movie with Wesley Snipes and Sean Connery. Remember that? And it was that movie was literally these Japanese bastards coming here and taking our white women. Yeah, and they were running amok. They're buying our assets. They're buying everything in Los Angeles, New York, right? And that was the height of that, by the way, the Michael Crichton's book was published just before the Japanese asset bubble bursted, right? So that was the height of the American fear of Japan. And Donald Trump was his peak years. That's his because he was complaining about how Toyota was taking over, like why Americans driving Japanese cars back then. Mm-hmm. So he has he has a thing. He has a thing against Japan. His antagonism with Japan carried over into year 2025, and this is why a lot of people in the Japanese establishment, they're really worried. Like the Japan-U.S. security pact, which had been for the Japanese right wing their cornerstone policy for decades, is gonna looking increasingly wobbly. Looks like U.S. might at least a tactical retreat, pivot away temporarily from Asia Pacific to wage war on Venezuela. Right? And they don't want that. They want. So this is why they feel like they need to press that button. They need to cross China's reddest of red line on Taiwan to create a crisis that forced United States to take a stance. So we got to stand with allies. You're already seeing a lot of U.S. politicians, EU politicians are already echoing that sentiment. And a lot of Twitter, quote unquote, influencers are all like, standing Japan right now. Because this would create a pressure for Donald Trump administration to do the same. And I think that is a gambit of the Japanese prime minister. Because they would very much like to return to kind of the Obama era relationship where Japan will essentially replace Great Britain as the special relationship with United States, because Pacific was supposed to eclipse the Atlantic, and then the Japan's future then will be secure as a junior partner of the United States. But now when Trump started talking about G2, that put Japan's future suddenly in jeopardy. This is my opinion. This is why the Japanese prime minister is doing what she's doing. She's trying to bring back the Japan-US alliance into the central focus by creating a huge diplomatic crisis with China.
Interesting. Does Japan know that the fascist countries that were associated with World War II, that there's a UN charter that allows for, let's say, the powers that won that war to attack those countries if indeed those countries were like remilitarizing and posing a threat to other countries? Meaning,
well, I have to admit, this was the first time I learned about it. Even because like China actually digged out that UN charter.
Well, I knew about it from Germany in the context of like Russia and Germany, where Russia could be like, look, don't mess with us. We can go after you if we need to. But Japan was one of those fascist militaristic countries also.
Yeah, but Japan sees itself as the junior partner of the United States. They have hitched their future onto the bandwagon of the U.S. empire. They thought they're kind of in the protected status, right? They're under the U.S. nuclear umbrella, so they thought they're safe. And this is another reason they are in power, so to speak, to poke the bear, because they thought, okay, well, U.S. will have to get our back because the U.S. nuclear umbrella covers us. But right now they're really trying to position themselves as the number one U.S. deputy in the Asia Pacific. That's the role they're going for.
China apparently has been quietly putting out strike maps against Japan. Have you seen this? DD Geopolitics released this. And these are sites where if some kind of war or something like that sparks off, that these are apparently the sites that China would hit Japan on.
Well, I just saw a Twitter account of a Chinese space. It's usually like this account usually tweet about China's space program, like the space station and all that. Today, I just saw that account tweeting about China's latest hypersonic missiles. And in the animated, in the end of the video is all those hypersonic missile warhead heading toward Japan.
Really?
So China is yes.
They're serious about this, basically. That's your point. They're very serious about this.
Yeah, I mean, like you, it's a reminder. Okay, two can play this game. If you're gonna place missiles 70 miles from Taiwan, well, guess what? We don't need to place missiles we have missiles based in China that can hit you, and they will hit you at hypersonic speed that you cannot avoid. So I mean, it's just a reminder. Like these things shouldn't need to be said, but given today's political environment, it needs to be made explicit. Like if you want to get involved in a war, this is what it looks like. This is what the war with China would look like for you.
Wow. This has escalated so much and so fast. I mean, I guess this is bad blood, as you pointed out once before, going back to the Second World War, for scores to be settled. But Japan has to know that it is not what it was in the Second World War. It is not this major militaristic superpower.
That's why they need a United States. They need to drag United States back in, because right now Trump is looking like he's in the final inning of trying to close out the Ukraine war. And so Japan thought, okay, well, this is our chance to be the centerpiece of the U.S. imperium. But at the same time, Trump looks like his own administration is kind of besetted by all kind of domestic issues right now. there's a revolt among MAGA ranks, over the
Yes.
Epstein files. So Japan's like, hey, don't be distracted. Let's focus on the goal here.
Yeah. It's
Let's
like focus on what's important. Us. Focus on us.
Yes.
What do you think about people who would say, well, the United States is really pushing Japan to behave this way? You don't buy that at all.
I don't think that's the case, because I think U.S. right now, right now it already had its hands full. U.S. would prefer to have certain tensions, no doubt, so the military industrial complex can keep on selling weapons, particularly to Taiwan. But it doesn't need to dial that to 11, right? Like U.S. is always trying to fine tune the tensions, so it doesn't go to war, but it gets simmering enough that they can keep the racket and the grift going. But they also is very careful. Like a lot. Even this is what the Japanese PM did is basically ditching the whole concept of strategic ambiguity, right? I mean, for the longest time, even U.S. is trying to dance around are we not going to come to get involved in a war around Taiwan? They say, well, can neither deny or confirm, but this time the Japanese Prime Minister spout out explicitly, say if there's warship around Taiwan, then that will be an existential issue for Japan that will obligate us to put our self-defense force outside of Japan to defend our interests. And that's kind of announcement that's the path to war. But I don't think even the U.S. military industrial complex at this particular point is ready to kick off World War III. They just want to keep the grip going.
And I guess the second question with this is, how serious is China with this? Like, this is not. It sounds like right now this is saber rattling, and it sounds like on
right
some
now
level China.
China is very upset. China is very upset that Japan choose to cross the red line. There's going to be diplomatic pressure, and there's going to be economic pressure. The economic pressure already happened. The tons of flight from China has been canceled going to Japan, and the tourism consists of about 7% of Japanese GDP, and the Chinese tourists are the second largest tourist group to visit Japan after South Korea. So the Japanese tourist economy is going to take a hit, no doubt. All the moms and pop shop catering to tourists, they're going to take a hit. And that will also apply to all kind of business deals. So now there's an idea that's been floated in Japan. They're talking about possibly applying a semiconductor component restriction on China. But they also need U.S. help, right? So before it was U.S. pressuring companies from Japan, Taiwan, Netherlands to do semiconductor sanction on China. But now it's Japan wanting U.S. to help them to put the pressure on China on the semiconductor supply chain. But that's a very dangerous game, because China still holds the rare earth supply chain. If China gonna tighten the grip on their balls over rare earth, there's still no good answers for that. I mean, they can't. We already saw what happened when Trump tried to tighten the semiconductor restriction on China. China just say, okay, no rare earth for you. And if Japan chose to go to the economic pressure route, I don't think they have what it takes by themselves. This is why they're asking help from United States, because they also realize by themselves, as you say, Japan at current in 2025 by themselves, they would not be able to confront China, whether militarily or economically. This is why they need United States, and so this is this is Japan's cry for help. It's like, Come back. We need you. Come back.
That is amazing.
So this is my take. My take on the situation.
Correct me if I'm wrong.
Why
Japan...
This
please.
is why, by the way, this is why the recent Chinese announcement is all pointed at Japan. They're not blaming United States. They're not blaming Donald Trump creating the tension over this. They're all putting the blame squarely on the Japanese Prime Minister. So in the meantime, Xi Jinping is picking up the phone with Donald Trump. They're having a chat, which according to Donald Trump is very cordial. They had a great call. So I think this I'm gonna stand by my reading of the events. I think this is kind of the tail wagging the dog situation. Well, the tail is attempting to wag the dog, but I don't think it will succeed.
One of the what time is it? Okay, we got 2 minutes. One of the people on Twitter who covers Chinese topics, Arnard Bertrand, I believe the name is.
Yeah,
she pointed out. Really. I think it's he. He pointed out that he thinks that this is a reshaping of the U.S. relationship between China and the United States, and that and I got to be honest, I disagree with some of the stuff Arnaud says, because he thinks that the United States on some level is pulling back from China. I don't necessarily buy that. I think this may be a repositioning. I don't know if it's a pullback, but whatever, putting that to the side for the moment. He makes this argument that this phone call on some level is trying to reshape the relationship between the United States from, let's say enemies or competitors in an overt sense, into guarantors of the post-World War II order. Like basically, we are trying to reframe you and reframe the way we relate to one another. Now that we've recognized each other as peers, then we need to go forward with this post-World War II order. And a recognition of that post-World War II order is that Taiwan is part of China, which I don't think the U.S. is going to accept. But that's his thoughts. Give me your thought on that. We have about 3 minutes.
I think U.S. I mean, it's obvious the U.S. elite would never give up on the U.S. primacy. That has always been the goal. And for the U.S. primacy, that they need to keep China and Russia in check. But I think what's happening is that they're doing a tactical pivot, not a strategic pivot. It's a tactical pivot to have so it could be advantageous to have a temporary détente with China and Russia, so U.S. can focus rooting out the Chinese influence from the other, like for example, West Hemisphere in Venezuela or Africa. By the time the U.S. have those sphere dominated, then they're a little bit more secure to then pivot back to come from Russia and China. This is my take. But I mean, but that is a shift away from kind of like we're going to take on a three-front war against Russia, China, and Iran at the same time, like they were saying just like a few years ago. So I think this also explains why Europe and Japan, all these vassals, are now trying to position themselves, trying to kind of alter that trajectory of U.S. because they realize if the U.S. even do a tactical pivot, they will be the ones that end up holding the bag, right? I mean, and that's not going to be looking pretty for them.
Carl, man, I always appreciate you, man. Thank you for this. Carl Jha, hosts Silk and Steel podcast, focused on China and surrounding regions and their history, culture, and politics. You can follow Carl on Twitter at Carl Jha. You can follow his podcasts at Steel Silk, the letter N. And you can subscribe and support the podcast on patreon.com/Silk and Steel. Carl, always appreciate you, man. Always enjoy these conversations. Always informed after the conversation. Thank you for this. You be safe, okay?
Thank you. Thank you, Jamar.
Have a good one. Bye-bye. All right. And to be fair, informed before the conversation door, would have to talk to him. But my man is here. Dimitri Lascaris. How you doing, man? You doing okay today?
I'm doing well, Jamal. How are you doing?
I am doing well, better that you are with me, and I thank you for being with me. Dimitri Lascaris, he is a lawyer, journalist, activist from Montreal, Quebec. He runs the show Reason to Resist, another damn good program. I've been watching your interviews for the last several weeks, and you do damn good work, man. So good job.
Good,
um,
I learned
one
a great
of the things I
deal
wanted
about the program. I just want to, emphasize that. Thanks.
Well, I appreciate that. I appreciate that. No, I had the opportunity to watch many of your interviews, and I thought they were very good. So no, I'm honest with my praise on that. One of the things, the Cradle, another really good organization that do really good work, pointed out that many of the countries are dropping out of participating in this kind of quote stabilization force unquote. And I don't know if you read the article specifically, but give me a take on that. That for all intents and purposes, many of these governments are like, yeah, I don't really want to put our people into that. And the reason I bring this up is because, you and I had this conversation about this idea of how are you going to disarm Hamas? And if you're putting in troops from Egypt, Indonesia, add random country into it, are they really going to take on military operations against Hamas in the way that Israel was taking on military operations against Hamas? And it seems that the answer, at the very least, according to the reporting, is no.
Yeah. So
at the very least, they don't want to.
Well, there are two major problems confronting any country, particularly from the Arab and Muslim world. And I think that those are where these countries, these candidate countries come from, predominantly, if not exclusively. There are two major problems with this proposal. The first is, what would lead one to believe that they can disarm Hamas and the other resistance groups? Of course, it's not just Hamas in Gaza, when Israel failed and applied the most destructive level and nature of force imaginable to the population of the Gaza Strip. These countries don't have better armed militaries than Israel, and they don't have anywhere near the level of familiarity with this terrain that the Israeli forces do. And so if Israel, after more than 2 years of applying every single weapon at its disposal, save nukes, to defeat the resistance in Gaza has failed, there's really no rational reason to believe that some other military force that's not nearly as familiar with the terrain or as well armed as Israel is going to pull it off. So that's the first thing. Can it even be done? And the second thing is, what is the cost going to be if it can be done? And if you're coming from an Arab and Muslim state, if you're the leader of such a state, you have to assume that in order to pull this off, because the resistance has been absolutely adamant that they're not giving up their weapons before a Palestinian state is created, you have to assume that A, your forces are going to suffer casualties, and B, your forces are going to kill Palestinians. And what is your population going to do when that happens? It's going to happen. There's no question it's going to happen. And so you may suddenly confront a serious level of instability and opposition within your own society for doing this, especially if people in your society are predominantly Muslim and Arab. So I'll be very surprised if any government that isn't, I really can't imagine that any government's going to be stupid enough to actually insert their forces into Gaza and try to take the weapons away from the resistance. And then the question arises, Jamal, is what will the Americans and the Israelis do? And one possibility is that they will resort to mercenaries. I'm sure they can find mercenaries who are going to try to pull this off. And now that the UN Security Council has blessed this abomination, I wouldn't exclude the possibility they're going to try to exploit that resolution and its ambiguities to do just that.
Well, obviously, they're also bombing Lebanon, and the attacks on Lebanon have escalated and increased. And it's getting to the point where they apparently have put out areas that they're going to strike. They've hit Beirut. And you've been to Lebanon, you've been to Beirut. And Hezbollah's, for the most part, kept their powder dry. And this is slightly confusing, but I think in speaking to people in the area, they pointed out that Lebanon is a divided country, kind of. And in the context of it being somewhat of a divided country, Hezbollah needs to, let's say, take a political position of showing, like, look, we're not doing anything, and they're still bombing and killing and preventing construction and those type of things. Give me your take on that. I mean, is that how you view, let's say, Hezbollah's reluctance to get involved into a larger conflict? Basically, we need Israel to be very clear that they are the ones, they are the aggressors, they are the ones that are effectively initiating this new war, this new conflict, because we need the country to be behind us, especially with some of the things the president has recently been saying, effectively condemning the attacks on Lebanese territory.
Well, let's just put aside what just happened, which is that Israel murdered the top military commander, the chief of staff of the Lebanese resistance. So what happens from here on in is a separate question. But up until now, Hezbollah has had a variety of reasons to show restraint. The first reason is the country was subjected to absolutely punishing attacks. The civilian population had been terrorized and ravaged over months of warfare. And there was a strong appetite amongst many Lebanese for a cessation of the hostilities, at least for some period of time. Understandably so. Secondly, they expended large amounts of munitions, and they now were going to have additional difficulty in rearming because of the fall of Assad in Syria and his replacement with this, vassal of Washington, this head chopper Jolani. Thirdly, they had a security problem, and the security problem was that Israel kept finding ways to kill their top leaders, and so I think they wanted to sort that out. They wanted to find out how it was that Israel was able to identify the time and place at which the most senior leaders of the organization were going to be appearing. And finally, I think that they needed to mobilize additional forces. They obviously suffered some casualties, wanted to take away lessons from the battlefield, because obviously the technologies are rapidly evolving, and they probably wanted time to confer and consult amongst the military leadership for dealing with the weapons that Israel was bringing to bear to the battlefield. So they had a whole bunch of reasons for doing that. But with this murder of the chief of staff, Jamal, I think they've got quite apart from whatever the leadership may or may not desire, they have a real political problem. And that is, if they allow this to go unanswered, I think they're going to suffer a very significant loss of prestige, and probably a considerable part of their base is going to be quite irate. I mean, and a member of their political council did come out and say in the last 2 days that Israel had crossed a red line. But in the same breath, he said it's possible that we will retaliate, and he made no commitment to that. He didn't even say, the standard, we will retaliate, but at a time and place of our own choosing. He didn't even say that. He just said it's possible we'll retaliate. So I don't know what they're going to do, but I think they're in a real bind if they don't engage in some form of response. The other thing to keep in mind is that apparently the Pope is on his way to Lebanon.
Is he?
Yeah. So I'm one of these people who doesn't believe that in geopolitics coincidences happen. Not like this. I would imagine, I can't prove it, but I suspect that Israel's very concerned about the Pope going to Lebanon, because that is going to draw the attention of a lot of people to the country and what's happening there, particularly people from the Christian community. And they don't want attention. They don't want the world's attention being fixated on the country that they're bombing every single day in violation of this so-called ceasefire. So maybe this was a way to try to deter the Pope from coming to Lebanon, because the Pope is going to be sitting there thinking, my God, a war is going to break out. Do I really want to go now? I don't know.
I considered visiting myself, actually. And my thought was like, well, will the airlines even be open? Will they be at war? I mean, Israel is bombing every day, and they're bombing, in a major city like Beirut. And they seem to be unrestrained in their operations. And they're doing this under the auspices of a quote unquote ceasefire. Is this something that is just necessary for Netanyahu to just remain in power? I mean, I think in part he has a mandate. And what I mean by mandate, the majority of the population is perfectly okay with Netanyahu murdering as many Arabs as he can murder. And if that means creating this kind of greater Israel, it seems that there is a tacit agreement in the political structure for them to create that greater Israel, taking the West Bank, taking Gaza, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, even taking parts of Syria, taking Lebanon in order to do that. I mean, from your take on this, just in looking at what is happening internally, and I'm not sure how much clarity there is internally in Israel. They've been at war for what, 3 years now, 2 years straight. This doesn't seem sustainable to me, but maybe I'm wrong.
Well, one should not assume that. I know a lot of people think that Netanyahu is very clever and rational and so forth. One should not assume that these people are actually rational. I personally think they're criminally insane. So it's possible that they're acting in an entirely self-destructive manner, and they're just not cognizant of that fact. They just kill, 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 and it's in their nature to do that. So that's one hypothesis we should always entertain when you're dealing with people like Netanyahu and his cabinet. But I think a more rational explanation for what he's doing is that demands are growing within Israeli society for an inquiry into October 7th. And
are they? Is it?
Yeah, vigorous demands, because Netanyahu's line was constantly, "We will engage in that inquiry when the war in Gaza is over." So you've got Trump running around saying, "Hey, it's over. We brought millennial peace to the region.
Right.
Now we put the peace board in place, got the UN Security Council." So people in Israeli society go, "Okay, Netanyahu, you said you were going to have a public inquiry. What's going on?" And he wants to avoid that desperately, because that could yield some extremely damaging revelations about him. So I think one possible explanation for what he's doing is he wants to revive the war with Hezbollah, because that is going to allow him to defer the inquiry indefinitely. So my view is that that's very likely to be a factor in what is going on here. But I think that's also may have been they just suddenly came across an opportunity. Some intelligence became available to them, as to the location of this Hezbollah military commander, and they decided to take advantage of it because they thought we may not get another chance. Apparently, they tried to assassinate him twice before and failed, according to the Israeli press. So clearly, this man has been a target of theirs for quite some time.
Have you seen reports that they were trying to assassinate Ayatollah?
I saw those reports around the time of the so-called 12-day war, yes.
No, I'm saying they were recent reports that they were looking for an assassination of Ayatollah. And Iran, obviously, is not necessarily tolerating this. And so there would be an overwhelming response if this effectively took place. Like, this doesn't seem rational to me. Like, some of the stuff just doesn't seem rational to me. I was having a conversation with Lawrence Wilkerson, and he was pointing out, he says, they have not taken their eye off Iran, that they're still looking for a war with Iran. And as I pointed out, I said, yeah, but they took the worst beating in their life in the 12-day war. He said, it doesn't matter. He said, from their point of view, Iran is the quote-unquote great snake, and they have not taken their eye off the ball in regards to going after and attacking Iran. This seems outlandish to me. Like, what is the expectation here? Well, we have nukes, we can provoke a fight, and we can always go back to nukes, despite the fact that we may take a beating in the process.
Look, their overarching goal is supremacy in the region. It's unchallenged supremacy. They've been very clear about that for decades. And they are now willing to engage in any provocation in order to achieve that objective. So I would be shocked if they're not hatching some sort of a plan to revive the war with Iran. But I think that they probably need to get some ducks in a row before they take another shot at it. There was a report in Haaretz just in the last 2 or 3 days, the Israeli liberal newspaper, that Israel's military has a manpower crisis. Apparently 600 officers have, asked to be released from duty. There's apparently a shortage of like 12,000 conscripts. The article also pointed out their munitions have been massively depleted. And the U.S. government is not in a particularly good place to rearm Israel because of all the munitions that have been sent and continue to be sent to Ukraine, right? So it may well be that they're going to have to delay a resumption of that war, but I can't imagine that they're just going to allow that administration, the Iranian government, which is hostile to Israel and its hegemony in the region, to remain in power. They're going to do everything they can eventually to remove it from power. And I'm not at all surprised that they seriously contemplated killing the Ayatollah. I mean, they were willing to kill Hassan Nasrallah. Why wouldn't they kill the Ayatollah?
And there's a widespread belief that Rouhani was also murdered, and that the Iranian government just doesn't want to own up to it and acknowledge it. Everybody that I've talked to in the Middle East believes he was murdered.
Me too. You can add me to that list. In fact, right after he was killed, our friend Laith Maroof and I, we did an episode on my program literally the next day in which we both were speculating that he had been killed. I mean, the whole thing just stinks to high heaven, the timing of it. Again, in geopolitics, coincidences are rare, true coincidences. And the fact that he died at this particular point when he apparently was close to the border with Azerbaijan, which is, up to all sorts of nefarious activities with Washington and Israel. The whole thing just stunk to high heaven. And Iran the leadership would have good reason to, I think, and they may not, by the way, they may not actually know exactly what happened to the president. It may be that there's doubt in their own minds, and so they're erring on the side of caution because they have doubts.
Many people I talk to about the Middle East, they would often bring up Russia and China in the context of what they consider to be a betrayal. And not just the security vote for the UN. It runs across the board on several angles. If Hezbollah is indeed attacked, do you think Iran will get involved? And if they don't get involved, are they also... You've never said this, so I'm not implicating you in this. I'm just pointing out, Iran is never brought into the conversation about supporting these areas of axis of resistance, whether it was Hamas, whether it was Lebanon, when Lebanon was viciously attacked by Israel. And they only got involved at the point where they were directly attacked, and up until the point where they effectively just stopped. Meaning they didn't take the opportunity to effectively decimate and destroy Israel's capability of maintaining the genocide. They just went up until a certain point and stopped. Should they also get implicated in this quote unquote blame that is often applied to Russia and China? And blame is too strong. I don't like blame is not the right word for it, but I hope you get my point. Is there a larger first question, I guess, is do you think they would get involved if Lebanon is directly attacked by Israel?
Well, can I just park that question for a second? I just want to say something about this UN resolution, because I'm just going to be brief about this, Jamal. I've been thinking about a way to really sort of convey to people how much of a betrayal this thing is. And the best analogy I could come up with, and I think it's a fair analogy, is that imagine if the UN Security Council had existed at the time of the Second World War, and that the Nazi regime came to the UN Security Council and asked it to put Hitler in charge of Auschwitz. That's what the UN Security Council has done with this resolution that they adopted 10 days ago. They put Hitler in charge of Auschwitz. It's as simple as that. You've got Trump and Netanyahu together now ruling Gaza with the imprimatur of the UN Security Council. And Gaza is a death camp at which a genocide has been perpetrated and continues to be perpetrated by these two individuals right up until the current time. This is, I can't find the words to express how horrible and abominable this resolution is, but I just got to get that off my chest. Okay.
And illegal. Hamas has the right to defend itself, and they've effectively come up with a UN resolution saying that is not the case. They have no self-determination. They don't get to defend themselves. They weren't right in defending themselves against a proper military, by the way, which is a resistance force. Hamas is a resistance force, not a proper military. It's not like Ukraine versus Russia. No, I full agreement.
Yeah, and all of this crap. Well, the Abbas wanted it passed, and Algeria and all the rest of it. Look, if they had actually consulted the victims of the genocide, they are unanimous, with the exception of the collaborator Abbas, that this is an atrocious resolution, right? So if they care so much about public opinion in this part of the world, why didn't they start by asking Palestinian civil society what they think about the resolution? They would have been told hell no, but they didn't ask. They didn't care. Anyways, to go
wait, real quick though, you make a really good point. What do you make of people who make this argument? Again, I talk to people across the political spectrum on this channel, and oftentimes what I found is that there's difficulty in that, because groups that you would think would be aligned on various issues often eat each other. And again, I've had people who stopped coming on my channel because of it. I've had people who threatened to effectively stop coming on the channel as a result of, let's say, differences in points of view. It's insane, like, of some of the stuff that happens behind the scenes on this stuff. But one of the arguments that people have made is, well, look, we were isolated. That for all intents and purposes, all of the Arab states were going to go for it. All of the Muslim states were going to go for it. And you'd have just had us playing spoilers. And for all intents and purposes, facts on the ground is what dictates what is happening. And all things being equal, the facts on the ground are not changing. Meaning these groups are not going to be able to disarm Hamas in the way that they think they are. We don't believe this plan is going to be able to go anywhere. And so we give our condemnation and we abstain because we don't necessarily want to be politically isolated in this case. Not to mention, they also make the argument that Hamas agreed to the ceasefire, quote unquote. And because they agreed to the ceasefire, one of the provisions of the ceasefire was a stabilization force. Do you accept that? Obviously, you don't accept that, but give me your rationale for not accepting it.
I'm not sure that there was an agreement. I don't recall seeing a provision in the agreement that Hamas signed that there were going to be any foreign troops coming into the Gaza Strip. I would be shocked if that contains, I just have no recollection of seeing that. I don't believe it for 1 second. They've been adamant that there aren't going to be any foreign troops in the Gaza Strip. But in any case, what are these people who are making this argument, what do they mean by isolated exactly? In what sense do they mean isolated? Do they mean that a bunch of corrupt vassals of Washington joined with Washington to pressure China and Russia into allowing this resolution to pass? Is that what they mean by isolated?
Yes.
Clearly, they do not mean by isolated that if they had vetoed the resolution, they wouldn't have had the support of the public. In fact, they would have had immense support from civil society, not just inside Palestine. I've seen all sorts of people across the world, including people like Francesca Albanese, highly respected figures in the international legal community, Craig Muhaiber, who've come out and blasted the fact that this resolution is passed and blame everybody for allowing it to pass, including China and Russia. And so they would have actually put themselves in a position of moral leadership, China and Russia, had they vetoed this resolution amongst, a huge swath of the human population. That doesn't sound like isolated to me, Jamal. So whose opinion do you care about at the end of the day? Is it some corrupt Arab autocrat that is completely manipulated by Washington, or is it the people? Apparently, China and Russia care about the former, but not the latter.
Yeah. I'm only making the argument to me. I'm not saying I believe that argument. I don't buy that argument. To me, look, I agree with you fully on this. I'm just making the argument that's presented oftentimes by people who, let's say, cover the Russian subject, but don't necessarily like the fact of the way that Russia and China voted on this issue. That's usually where they go to on this one.
And before anybody accuses me of being hostile to Russia and China, look, man, I've had hit pieces written about me in Canada by major newspapers because I have been so critical of foreign policy towards Russia and China. I've rejected 90% or more of the narrative about the governments of Russia and China. I've said many good things about them, and I paid a price for it. So this has nothing to do with any kind of bias against Russia or China. I don't suffer from that disease, believe me. But this is, principle is principle, man. And this thing, like I said, they put Hitler in charge of Auschwitz.
Yeah, no, you have my full agreement on this. Full agreement on this. And I think I made the same argument. I think I came out with a blistering monologue the day that this was effectively passed, bashing both. In fact, I think even the title of the video was effectively bashing both for accepting this. So no, you have my full agreement. Would Iran get involved if Lebanon is attacked, or when Lebanon is attacked? Because this seems like a when, not an if.
Well, Lebanon is getting attacked. It's been attacked every single day, and Iran has not since the so-called 12-day war ended or was suspended. So, Iran hasn't directly intervened at any point. The genocide is ongoing. Iran hasn't directly intervened at any point, but it is, assisting. I would imagine it has provided economic and military support to the resistance groups in the region, Hezbollah, Ansar Allah, the popular militias in Iraq. And I don't know to what extent they've been able to assist the resistance in the Gaza Strip because of the siege, but I have no doubt they would provide such assistance if they could practically pull it off. So it can't really be said that they're not intervening at all. But have they directly attacked Israel since the 12-day war? No, despite, So I can't really fault them for that at the end of the day, because they have paid a huge price. There is very likely going to be a resumption of this war, so they're getting ready for that. And I think they don't want to put themselves in a position where they provide the United States with a pretext to come in on the side of Israel with all guns a-blazing. They have to be very concerned about that. And they also have to be concerned about, just be blunt about it, Jamal, they have to be concerned about getting nuked. One thing that the good thing, I guess, about living close to this genocidal monster Israel is that Israel is not going to nuke you, because ultimately the fallout's going to go to Israel.
Yes.
But there's no such concern, I think, on their part when it comes to Iran. So Iran's undoubtedly, that is something they're concerned about. You'd be crazy not to think about the possibility that Israel will nuke you.
Yeah. Well, one last question on this. Do you think people are seeing BRICS wrong? Like, when they're thinking of Russia, China, let's say India, et cetera, and the BRICS nations, oftentimes they give them an idealistic streak that I don't think exists in the way that I think people see them. Like, they see them as, well, they're going to be this counterbalance. They're going to intrude into these other geopolitical issues, kind of like the Soviet Union. I don't know if that's the way the organization is set up. I get the sense that this is a realist organization with various different political ideologies, in which case they function on what is in their own self-interest, not necessarily in this kind of global self-interest. And I consider all of these countries function that way. Give me your take on this, though. Maybe you see this differently than I do.
It's not the BRICS is not a monolith. So, for example, you have South Africa, which admirably is pursuing Israel for genocide, right? And that's not a little thing. I'm sure. Look at how hostile he is to South Africa, and I'm sure in some way, economically, politically, they've had to pay a price for that. So it wasn't China or Russia who brought that application before the International Court of Justice. Right. But at the end of the day, the BRICS countries, particularly China, Russia, and India, are focused on their own national well-being. That's really all that matters to them at the end of the day, their own security. And if you look at the socioeconomic statistics in these countries, particularly China and Russia over the past 25 years, there's a strong argument that they've done well by their people. Lifespan, per capita income, poverty rates, in all of these important metrics, or most of these important metrics, you've seen dramatic improvement over the past 25 years. And, good on them for doing that. They deserve to be praised for it. But when it comes to geopolitics and international relations, they're in it for themselves, man. That's it. Like I said, there may be people who think that's perfectly legitimate and fine, and that's the way of the world. Okay, if that's your position, just don't tell us that this is going to be some kind of new, world order where international law and human rights will come to the fore and we'll find newfound respect for these things. That's not going to happen with BRICS. Multipolarity, I will say, is better than unipolarity, because there is a check on the power of the hegemon, and that's important. So this is an improvement, but we are a long way away from a truly just and lawful world. And BRICS ain't going to get us there.
Yeah. It's economic union. I think people need to reorient how they look at its, let's say, function and world and its purpose. Agreed. Dimitri, man, always appreciate these conversations. I really do. Dimitri Lascaris. He is a lawyer, journalist, activist from Montreal, Quebec, host of Reason to Resist. Check him out on YouTube. He has a fantastic channel. He does damn good work. By the way, when is your next show, just for the audience to be aware of?
We're publishing today my most recent conversation with Laith, and we primarily focused on Lebanon and the coming war, because there's going to be one, whether it's tomorrow or 5 months from now. So that's something I think, if you're interested in what's going on in Lebanon, Laith had a lot of very interesting revelations.
Dimitri, always appreciate you, man. You have a fantastic rest of your day, okay?
Thanks, man. Peace out.
Be safe. Bye-bye. All right, we're going to go from one great guest to another great guest. We have Shobhan Saxena. How you doing, Shobhan? You doing okay this morning?
I'm fine. Thank you, Jamal. How are you? Good morning to you and all your listeners.
Yeah, thank you for joining me, man. You sent me, oh, just for the audience, let me give you your bio so the people know who you are going immediately into the story. I'm Shobhan Saxena. He's an Indian journalist based out of Sao Paulo, Brazil, in a career spanning more than 30 years. He has reported from the Times of India, the Hindu, the Indian Express, and various other publications in India. Right now, he's an international correspondent for DD India, the international channel of India's public broadcaster. Shobhan, thank you for joining me, man. Um, the Trump administration has, if I remember correctly, nearly 20% of US assets in the Caribbean. Like, that is a huge amount of military and manpower that is effectively in this area. They're apparently training in Puerto Rico. They're training in jungles, almost as if they're training for jungle warfare. Um, and you wrote a piece where you hit me up and you said you think you understand, or at the very least have a sense of Trump's endgame. And it is, just so the audience can see it for themselves, this right here. Trump's spear of the South, quote unquote, sparks regional alarm as Venezuela braces for U.S. moves. Washington declares Operation Spear of the South against narco-terrorists, cartel heads, Nicolas Maduro, as it moves to heavy firepower in the Caribbean. Observers say the move could be aimed at regime change in Caracas and reasserting U.S. power over the region amid rising influence of Russia and China. And before I let you in, just today, we get news that Cartel del Sol, the group that doesn't exist, is put on the foreign terrorist list, which effectively put Maduro on the list because he's supposedly the head of a narco state. What is going on with this?
Jamal, I think that let's look at it from two different aspects. One is, why is the Trump administration doing what they're doing? And what is the end game here, actually? So, Trump presidency is in all sorts of trouble. All the promises he made about the economy, they have not come true. All the promises he made about the tariff war against China and other countries, they're falling short of expectations. So I think he's facing a lot of heat at the home. I'm not even getting into all the controversy about the Epstein files and how he's facing a challenge from within the party, from the MAGA movement. People like Marjorie Taylor Greene and Thomas Massey, they're really taken on him. So I think Trump right now, politically, is not in a very good situation. I think this could be the weakest point of his presidency. And like all American presidents, when they're in trouble, they want a diversion. And what best diversion than attacking a country which they consider as enemy, or which is branded as enemy for the American people? I think the easiest thing in America is to sell a war to American people. But I think right now the American people may not be in the mood for a new war, because a poll came out, I think yesterday or day before, in which 60% or more than 70% Americans are against attack on Venezuela. Right? Okay. And as you rightly put, I mean, 20% of the American forces are in the Caribbean, Puerto Rico, TNT, around Venezuela, around in the waters around Venezuela. But I think to make an actual invasion, a land invasion, you need more than that. You don't invade a country like in Venezuela with 15,000 people. You remember the Iraq War and the first World War II. It took months of preparation, and they have hundreds of thousands of troops in Kuwait, and despite the fact that they had military bases already in Saudi Arabia and Kuwait, and still they sent hundreds of thousands of troops to mount an invasion on Iraq. So I don't think a land invasion of Venezuela is a possibility, because this force is not enough. And as I wrote in my article, Venezuela is not going to be a cakewalk. Venezuela has a formidable army. They have more than 300,000 soldiers. They have Russian Sukhoi 30 fighter jets, S-300 missiles. Venezuela is quite capable of defending itself. It's not Iraq, it's not Afghanistan. They are capable of defending themselves. So if the US is planning a big attack on Venezuela, they need a lot more forces, a lot more weapons in the region. That's not the case at the moment. So what is the US or Trump administration is trying to do here in Venezuela? So as I wrote in my article, I think The real purpose could be a regime change operation. So the idea is to put pressure on the army, put pressure on the establishment in Venezuela, create some kind of fear so that there's some kind of internal disturbance inside Venezuela, which takes Nicolas Maduro out of power. I think this could be the game. But given all the indications, all the signs coming from Caracas, from Venezuela, I don't think that's going to happen. Maduro is in a very, very strong position. He enjoys the support of the military. He enjoys support of the large section of society. I saw his video. He was dancing yesterday, enjoying his birthday party. So
he can dance. He can cut a rug. Yeah, he can dance.
Yeah, and I don't think he's really bothered by so much by all these threats coming every day, and all this branding a cartel which probably doesn't exist as a terrorist organization, and the president of a country as a leader of the terrorist organization is beyond ridiculous. And even even the U.S. doesn't have much support on this issue, even from its allies. I mean, there was a report that UK is going to cut off intelligence sharing with US regarding Caribbean waters, and the French also give a statement saying this is not really legal what the US is doing. And you can't forget the region, the important countries like Brazil and Colombia and other countries and regions have opposed it, and they're not very happy with it. So if you take all these factors together, I think it's more like a muscle flexing, show of strength, threat, but an actual war, in my opinion, is not going to happen. Yes, the US is quite capable of doing damage by launching some missiles and rockets like they did in Iran some months ago. That is their capacity. That is their strength. They can launch missiles from a distance, from a safety of distance. You can attack any country. But if you really want to do a regime change operation, destroy the infrastructure, you will have to send the boots on the ground. And I don't think US has the capacity or appetite at the moment to send troops or boots on the ground in Venezuela.
So you think these are just threats, that this much military hardware that is in the area is done purely for the thing of, if we can threaten Maduro enough, we can create enough pressure, then internal elements of Venezuela itself will take over and get rid of Maduro. If we put the what is it called, the bounty high enough, if we work with opposition groups in the region, that maybe we can get rid of them. I mean, Maduro does seem to be bothered, or at the very least worried. I mean, do you buy the reporting that's coming out places like the New York Times, where they pointed out that Maduro was trying to make deals with the Trump administration to cut down the pressure, and that the Trump administration effectively was going with the Marco Rubio angle, where Rubio was saying, look, we need to take Venezuela. And part of the issue was Russia, China, Iran, and the relationship that Russia, China, and Iran effectively has with Venezuela being in their backyard. Where do you place that? Or you don't place that at all? You still place that under this notion of, no, these are just threats. This is not the U.S. Risking putting boots on the ground in some kind of regime change operation to get rid of Maduro. They want the regime change effectively on the cheap.
Yeah, mind you, Jamal, this is not just a threat to Venezuela. It's a threat to the whole region.
Yes.
They're giving a signal to all the countries in the region, to Colombia, to Brazil, everyone. I think what is happening here, and this is based on what I wrote in my article for The Hindu, that the US is reclaiming its supremacy over the Western Hemisphere, in especially South America. They already have a lot of power and influence in Central America, maybe not so in Mexico, but other countries they have military bases, other things, not in Cuba, not in Mexico, but they even have a military base in Cuba, practically Guantanamo Bay. So I think, so I think what has happened, if you listen to people like Steve Bannon, the ideologue, who's the ideologue of the MAGA movement, and he made this point many times in his various interviews after Trump got elected, how the United States is going to reclaim Western Hemisphere from Greenland to Panama and then down to South America. I mean, this is their idea of multipolarity. This is our region, this is our hemisphere, we'll dominate it, and other countries, China or Russia or other BRICS countries, they can dominate other parts of the world. but this is our hemisphere. This is Monroe Doctrine on steroids, actually. Is going to happen or not? That's another issue, because the ground reality, the geopolitical situation in the past 30, 40 years has changed completely. We are not in the 19th century anymore. We are not in the 1960s. This is not the Cold War era. This is a different situation altogether. Countries have tasted freedom. They have got rid of dictatorships. Their countries like BRICS are now major leaders in the world, are very important geopolitical players. Other countries want to join BRICS. And almost all countries in South America have a very good trading relations with China. And China is the biggest trading partner of all South American countries. They
Yes.
also have a lot of trade with Russia, and it's growing with India. Other BRICS countries are showing interest in joining the BRICS group. So the situation is very, very different. But nevertheless, the US is trying to assert its hegemony in the region. And by threatening Venezuela, because they think Venezuela is the weakest country in the region in terms of economy, because yes, its economy has been damaged badly because of the all the sanctions put over the years. They can't sell the oil. It has the one of the highest reserves of crude petroleum, but they can't refine it. They can't sell it. Of course, the economy has suffered. So I think they're trying to threaten Venezuela, hoping to engineer some kind of regime change in Venezuela and give a message to other countries in the world: if you don't accept our supremacy, our hegemony in the region, the same thing can happen to you. That is a message. I think, yeah, I think it's just a more than a show of its strength,
Mhm.
a message to the whole region and to other players in the world also, that this is our region and we'll do what we want to do here.
If indeed this is about the region as a whole, where does the region fall on this? I mean, does the US have allies, for example, where they can set up bases closer to Venezuela? Um, and is there pushback from the various countries that are in the region? I know Petro has been very aggressive in pushing back on this. I know Lula has made comments about his concern recently. But has the region itself come up with what am I looking for? What's the word I'm looking for? A cohesive strategy as a region, as opposed to individual states that are giving their commentary?
Well, I don't think there's a cohesive strategy as a bloc. South America is not a bloc.
Right.
There's a bloc, Mercosur and all, but that's an economic bloc, yeah. But there are powerful countries like Brazil is an important is the most important, is the biggest economy, is the biggest country in the region. Colombia is another very important country, and both these countries have spoken against the possibility of war in the region. There has not been a war in South America since the 19th century. There was a war between Brazil and Paraguay way back in 19th century, and it was provoked by the British,
Mhm.
as usual. So so I don't. Yeah, but I don't because there was a survey, or there was a referendum in Ecuador about setting up military bases in that country, and that proposal was rejected.
That
So I
was under
don't
Correa,
think.
I believe.
Sorry.
That was
Yeah.
under Correa. Yeah.
No, recently again. No, it happened this
Oh,
week
the most
again.
recent. Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. So they don't want a military base. Of course, the country like Argentina under Javier Milei will be more than happy to provide any kind of support to the American forces. But Argentina is down there. It's very far from Venezuela. It's very far from the Caribbean, and they have their own problems. So I don't think they will actively get involved in a war if it happens. I think there's a lot of posturing, there's a lot of politicking going on, but I don't think. But I think if you look at the mood in general, I think countries may have problem with Venezuela. They may not like Nicolas Maduro, but nobody is asking for, or nobody wants an actual war in South America or a forced regime change, because given the history of this continent, the people here have suffered for 30, 40 years from the 60s and 70s and 80s. Everybody knows what happened in Chile.
Yes.
The brutal
For sure.
dictatorship of Augusto Pinochet, removal of Allende. It happened in Brazil. It happened in Argentina. All those. So people have very, very bitter memories about the bloody past of the region, And I think this operation, Southern Spear, whatever the Americans are calling it, is a reminder of American military intervention in the region that can trigger a lot of they can trigger a lot of instability in the region. And the focus of the region, whether the right wing government or left wing government or center right or center left, nobody wants a military conflict in the region, because all the countries right now are focused on the economic development. That is their focus. They might be faltering, they may not succeed. That's another story. But nobody wants a war in the region. And the US doesn't have the kind of military alliances they used to have here in the 60s and 70s, when they actually engineered all the coup in the region and installed military dictatorships, including Brazil. So given this history and given the present, I don't see anyone is going to openly support American attack on Venezuela. It will be seen not an attack on Venezuela, it will be seen as an attack on South American continent.
And what will South America do if that attack takes place? I mean, that's what it boils down to, right? I mean, this is the issue of whether you have enough swords to make it painful to prevent any kind of attack or any kind of, I mean, at least that's the way my mind works. And that's the way seemingly the US works. If we do this, what will be the consequences of this? And it's great, it's a gamble, right? I mean, as you point out, this doesn't seem to be enough troops in order to engineer some kind of overwhelming regime change with boots on the ground. What about political opposition in Venezuela? People like Machado. I mean, she's calling for the open attack of her own country, which is just mind-blowing when you think about it. But does she have political support in that sense to try to engineer some kind of, like, for example, not Honduras, what is the other one? Bolivia. Bolivia is a really good example. You have an election. Evo Morales wins the election overwhelmingly. And you get let's say, a Western organization claiming that the polls were rigged. You get a right-wing mob, basically a junta that effectively takes over the government, dragging people through the streets and everything else. And he came out of nowhere, seemingly came out of nowhere. Is that what the U.S. is trying to push for in Venezuela? Effectively working with, let's say, groups that are on the ground in the region, where the U.S. military and the amount of U.S. military becomes less relevant because you have already either mercenaries or people within the country itself that is willing to take over most of the, let's say, the heavy lifting of regime change.
Let me go back into history. When the British came to India in the 17th, 18th century, they didn't invade India in one go. I mean, they spread across the country slowly and slowly. First, they came to the eastern part and southern part, and then they spread slowly to the central and northern part. And the whole process took almost 100 years, always working with the local elite. So the local elite in all these part in the different princely states of India were their partners. So using the policy of divide and rule, that is an old British playbook. That's how they conquered Asia. That's how they conquered the world. And Americans use the same playbook, divide and rule. So they're working with the Venezuelan so-called opposition. I mean, I don't know, Mariana Machado, she claims she's in hiding, but she's making videos almost every day. She's making videos, she's active on social media, where she's hiding. And what kind of politician, Venezuelan she is, that she's asking Americans to attack her own country? I mean, she has no sense of history. They haven't seen what happened to Iraq, what happened to Afghanistan, what is done to Libya. So I mean, if you have any sense of honesty, any sense of history, you'll see that you'll understand the true implications of this possible war on your own country. I think, of course, 100% population may not like Nicolas Maduro. He may not have support of even, let's say, 60% or 40% of the population, but he enjoys support. And I don't think the opposition is really very active at the moment in domestic politics. And I think majority of the opposition politicians will understand the implications of attack on a country. If an attack happens, it will be an attack on the Venezuelan infrastructure, refineries, petroleum depots, telecommunication network, bridges. That's what Americans do. When they went into Iraq, before going into Iraq, they destroyed 2,000 bridges in Iraq.
Wow.
2,000 bridges were destroyed in Iraq. Everything was taken out. And then they went in. And they talk about, oh, the Russians are taking so much time in conquering Ukraine. Russians have not really attacked Ukraine in that sense. No, they've not attacked the civilian areas. They've not attacked civilian infrastructure. The trains are still running between Europe and Ukraine. The
Yep.
tunnels are still working between Ukraine and Europe. So Russians have been, not done what Americans are used to do. So I think, given this history, I think anyone asking for attack on your country, I think in my opinion, is simply an act of treason, nothing else. And that person has been given a Nobel Peace Prize by the Norwegians. I think that's basically putting a seal of approval on this Donald Trump's possible war in Venezuela. They didn't have the courage to give Nobel Peace Prize to Trump, but they kind of greenlit his plan to attack Venezuela or to threaten Venezuela by giving a Nobel Peace Prize to Mariana Machado.
Shobhan, I'm going to put your article at the bottom of this video. From your mouth to God's ears. I mean, I hope it really is just pressure. I guess my concern is that pressure sometimes can, like, how do you back away, if that makes sense? Like, how do you put this much armaments, this much military, this much pressure, then put them on the foreign terrorist watch list? You make all of these arguments that Maduro is head of a narco empire. And then you say, okay, we were just playing and we're going to now back away from this. That seems to be very hard to pull off and very hard to do. I guess my concern is that this has become an escalating issue where you start off with threats. You start off with, okay, we're going to try to engineer a regime change. Okay, well, he has too much political support. And then you're stuck with the question of, now what? Do we walk away or do we continue to escalate? That's my concern, that what starts off as threats eventually becomes this kind of forced military campaign because the president doesn't want to look weak in the process of backing away from what he considered to be a drug empire. I suppose we'll see.
Yeah, I think, well, one important point I would like to make here is that this is as much as Trump's war as much as Marco Rubio's, because
Yes.
I think Trump is already a lame duck president because this is a second term. He's not. He may claim whatever. He's not going to run for president again unless something drastic happens. So I think within the MAGA movement, within the Republican Party, a kind of fight has already started. Who's going to replace? Who's going to be the candidate from GOP in 2028? I think Marjorie Taylor Greene, the position she has taken, I think could be a step in that direction. There's going to be a fight for ownership of MAGA movement. Who's going to own it? And Marco Rubio, given his background, Florida, he comes from there, and Florida is a Miami is a
Miami Cubans.
A bit of wipers, all the that plays a very, very important role in deciding at least Republican in politics. And Donald Trump is also based in Florida for a reason. So I think the Marco Rubio is also trying to position himself as some kind of successor to Trump. So I think we can see but I think there's a lot of American domestic politics angle here. Very important angle is the American domestic politics and this positioning by our different leaders. Like Marjorie has a completely different position on the wars abroad. She is not supporter because I don't think the MAGA supporters have any appetite for a new war in any part of the world. They don't want it, definitely. Not all of them, but a vast majority of them do not want a war. So I think it will depend on a lot of factors. The domestic politics will decide very much what's going to happen in Venezuela. But as you said, right, when you escalate, it's very difficult to de-escalate because this escalation has its own dynamics, and then you may have to do something, if for nothing, just to save your face, because you have spoken so much about, so much rhetoric, so much threat you've done. You've got to do something after that. You can't back off, because if you back off, then I think there are people like warmongers like Mike Pompeo and John Bolton and and even Democrats, some Democrats, they're going to go after you. Oh, what happened? You didn't do this. You promised a war and you didn't deliver it. That is a crime in the US. If you promise a war, you go to war. So I think
Yes.
this is as much a show within the US as much in the South American theater for American hegemony and American dominance.
Shobhan, thank you for this, man. You do damn good work, and I love your reporting. And I'm going to put this article at the bottom just so the audience can see it for themselves and read it for themselves. Like I said, from your mouth to God's ears. I hope this is just a show. I mean, I think it was Caleb who pointed out in the first term, Donald Trump pressured and then backed off. But this is year one, right? There is no Trump and Russia stuff. There's none of that stuff. And the guy that he seems to put in ahead of it is a complete ideologue. But hopefully this does not turn into something kinetic, any more kinetic than it is. I'm Shobhan Saxena. He is an Indian journalist based out of Sao Paulo, Brazil. In a career spanning more than 30 years, he's reported from the Times of India, the Hindu, the Indian Express, and various other publications in India. Right now, he's an international correspondent for DD India, the international channel for India's public broadcaster. Shobhan, you have a great rest of your day, man. Thank you for this.
Thanks very much, Jamal. Always a pleasure to talk to you.
Absolutely, man. Be safe. Thank you. All right. We have come to the end. And Lord knows, I hope Shobhan is right, that this is a pressure campaign. I mean, thing is, you're getting reports that are kind of all over the place. Donald Trump wants to talk to Maduro. It's like, okay, well, what else are you talking about? He pretty much offered you everything, according to the New York Times, and you turned him down. Then it becomes Marco Rubio is running lead on this. And Marco Rubio has convinced Trump that he should take Venezuela as opposed to having some kind of deal. Then Trump is like, yeah, I don't know if I'm going to attack Venezuela. Like, it's all over the place. To me, it's the military assets that is the thing I pay attention to. And if you're putting the guy on the terrorist watch list and you're putting 20% of your military arsenal in that area, does that stuff have a momentum on its own? And my take is yes, it does. So, yeah, shout out to Shobhan. Shout out to all of my guests for today. And let's see, we have chats. Let's go to the chats. The war's killing mostly working class Xian men. If the people in power didn't like such men, they'd want this war to go on forever. I don't understand what that means. Xian men, Z-I-A-N. Let me look that up. I want to make sure I get my understanding right. Oh, I see. Yeah, I mean, look, I think, I don't know if this is in relation to, why can't I see it? Oh, there we are. I mean, let's be honest. The working class are usually the people who die in wars anyway. I mean, if we take this to Ukraine for a moment, the majority of the people that are being murdered in Ukraine are working class people. These aren't, people in power. These are people who are being dragged off the streets, thrown into the military in order to fight these wars. That's always the case. And in the context of Ukraine, yeah, I don't think they care all that much. From the standpoint of China and from the standpoint of Japan, look, I think this is a lot of rhetoric. Obviously, China is pissed. There's grievance that goes all the way back to the Second World War. China is too pragmatic to just attack a country, though. I tend to agree with Carl on this, that this is a cry for help from the Japanese. I don't know. I suppose we'll see, for better or for worse. I just get sick of the constant saber rattling. Ask Carl what Lath said about China. Carl and I already had that conversation, believe it or not. The last time Carl was on the show, we had a conversation about the stabilization force, if I'm not mistaken, if I remember correctly, and about China's role. And look, his argument was effectively the same. Like, China doesn't want to rock the boat. China is already in a pissing match. Russia's already at a war. Did we talk about the stabilization force? For some reason, I want to say yes. If I am not mistaken, Carl was on immediately after that vote was taken, and I asked him about that vote. It was on the last show, if I'm not mistaken. The last time Carl was on the show, I believe we talked about it. We already had the conversation. But fair enough. I get your point. To Carter, if Russia was in it for themselves, they would not help the AES countries in Africa. Yes, they would. Yes, they would. Look, assume for the moment, take the assumption, the countries are realists, meaning countries that do what is in their interest to do, period. And if you are looking at the world, let's say you're looking at the world map, and you're looking at it as a chessboard, and you think to yourself, there are countries that are closely aligned with the US, and they're closely aligned, or countries that are not. And that there are great countries, great space. There are areas of the globe that are non-aligned, or that at the very least are not necessarily closely aligned with any particular country. Is it in your best interest to create allies or not in a world like that? Meaning in a world where countries bend towards powers, whether it's all of these European countries bending towards the United States, or let's say countries in South America bending towards China, or let's say even the Donbass region, Donetsk, Lugansk, etc., deciding to vote and go with Russia. Is it in the Russian interest to have more of these countries to agree with you, or is it not in your interest to have these countries agree with you? And by the way, I'm not saying they're wrong for this. I'm saying this is just the practical realities of the world to which we operate. There's a reason you have diplomacy. There's a reason you work with other countries. There's a reason that China is building hospitals and bridges and roads, etc. There's a reason they're doing that. Yes, part of it is we want the world to be a better place. The other part of it is, if I build a hospital in your country, you're going to appreciate the fact that I built a hospital in your country, not just a military base. You're going to appreciate that I am assisting you militarily to push back against the West. You're going to appreciate that I'm doing X, Y, Z. Meaning you are removing the gray space from a geopolitical chessboard and bringing somebody closer to your coffers, or closer to your side of the argument and to your political orientation, as opposed to having that being open as something that is knocked over and put into the context of the West. Is it better for Russia to be in Syria's context? Yes. Is it better for Iran and these major countries to be? Yes, it is. Like, so an element of it you could say is, hey, it helps that country. Agreed. But it also helps to have another country that is at the very least with you on the world stage. No country wants to be isolated. And isolation in this case is, surrounding. So, Taharka, yes and no. It is in their interest to back those countries in Africa. It is in their interest to have African countries waving Russian flags, saying, kicking out the French and bringing in the Russians, as opposed to having the Americans that are in those camps. If you're dealing with a hostile country such as America or such as the Europeans, is it better to have those countries siding with the Europeans, or is it better to have those countries siding with you? Obviously, it's better having those countries siding with you, meaning the political support and the help and assistance that you give those countries is an assistance to those countries, but it is also in your best interest to have those countries align with you. Why do you think America gives so much money to other countries? Why do you think it gives so much money to Egypt? Or why do you think it gives so much money to, in regards to foreign policy? It does so not because it cares. It does so because it wants those countries aligned, and that money has strings attached in the way that the money is being given. Now, obviously, Russia may be giving that money, maybe not as much with a cynical hand where you're intruding into the internal politics of that particular nation. But they certainly know that if they're assisting countries, that those countries are going to be more aligned with them as opposed to the West. So I don't believe in altruistic countries. I just don't. I just don't buy it. They have too many responsibilities to be altruistic in the way the countries operate. So, just pointing it out. All right. I am going to end this. I'm going to say like. I'm going to say share. I'm going to say subscribe. I want to thank all of you who donated yesterday for the 1-year anniversary. You have my deepest appreciation for that. I want to thank all of the kind words that were sent. Yeah, let's keep this boat rocking. I would not be here on Thursday, just giving a heads up in advance. Nobody plucked me away or anything like that. And for Christmas, I'm also not going to be doing the show for Christmas, at the very least for several days that week, because for the most part, most people don't work on those days anyway. And I strongly suspect it will be a hard go to bring people on for interviews when they're like, dude, it's Christmas week. I'm not doing it. So for Thanksgiving, I don't know about Black Friday. I will give you a heads up about Black Friday on Wednesday. But I'm going to say like, share, subscribe. You can support this content. PayPal, Patreon, Super Chat, Buy Me a Coffee. All of these things help support the content. I'll see you guys bright and early tomorrow morning. By the way, Kofi should be back tomorrow. Kofi's out the bush. So he should be back tomorrow morning. All right. So I'm not doing Black Friday sales. I'm not doing Black Friday sales either. I'm not doing it either. But I still like Thanksgiving. Yeah, I still like Thanksgiving. You all have a fantastic day. You all be safe. I'll see you in the morning. Have a good one all.